Welcome to Kelly Minds Her Manners, a podcast about real estate and entrepreneurship with a twist. Here's your host, Kelly Robinson.
Hey, thanks for showing up. Welcome to today's episode of Kelly Minds Her Manners. I am interviewing Coach Curtis. Jason Curtis is a highly experienced strength and conditioning coach and best-selling author who has published over a dozen books on the development of health, fitness, and sports performance. He owns and runs an S&C gym in the UK and works with hundreds of clients and athletes each week. Alongside the gym, Jason is the founder of the SCC Academy, which has qualified and upskilled over 20,000 fitness professionals and enthusiasts worldwide. Today's episode is extremely educational when it comes to fitness, and Jason has a great story and journey. He was a fitness trainer in the infantry in the UK, and wait till you see what his hidden talent is and if he answers all of my Fearless 5 questions at the end. So please welcome Coach Jason Curtis. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to interview you. As somebody who cannot sit still and is a fitness fanatic, I am very, very interested to hear what you have to say and share with our audience.
Brilliant. Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So I want to get going. And normally I like to ask people to start from the beginning. So tell us about your childhood, where you grew up, how did your upbringing shape or not shape who you are today?
I grew up in what is a small town in the UK, in Cheshire, just outside of Manchester. I was growing up really through the 90s. So it was a good time, really, because it was in some ways pre sort of all the smartphones and tech. You know, we were out sort of playing out in the streets and stuff like that from a very, very early age into sort of sport and fitness. I was a Thai boxer and boxer. So that's what I got into quite young and sort of had an interest in having my own gym as an adult, and I wanted to have sort of like a combat gym that did everything. I have 3 brothers, so we're all quite physical as young lads, you know. So we had quite a brilliant upbringing, really. It was you know, exactly what you sort of want from it. Mum and dad were great, and my dad was sort of very laid back in a sense that you could do what you wanted to do. Not sports, he never pushed you into anything. So I sort of pursued that path and boxed all the way through school. But I knew that I wanted to join the military. I wasn't 100% certain whether I wanted to do sort of a long career or whether I wanted to just do a short stint. I just knew that I might regret it if I didn't sort of try it and go do a little bit of traveling. And I joined the infantry. However, my main goal was to become a physical training instructor within the army. I just sort of come across the role and thought, well, that's sort of the coolest job I could think of is training soldiers, essentially. I did want to join as a physical training instructor, but in the British Army, you're not actually allowed to join as a PTI, they call them. You've got to join something first, and then if you're fit enough, if they see you as capable, you then go on your sort of course and become as a PTI. Okay. So that's what I did. Joined the infantry. Within a year, I was a PTI. About a year in London. Then I moved to Germany for 2 years. Then to Cyprus, and then moved back to the UK, to the northeast. 6 years into then, I decided that I'd sort of leave the army, and that's where I went into where I am now, essentially.
Well, I love the fact that you were passionate about what you do now and that you really followed through with it since a very young age. Also, I have to say, so I was born in New York City, but my parents then moved us up to Cheshire, Connecticut, which is named after Cheshire, England.
Oh,
so,
wow.
Yeah, so that's kind of a funny
coincidence.
Yeah, absolutely. You always had a passion for combat sports and you always wanted to join the army. Why do you think that was?
A lot of it was just my character as an individual. You know, it was very much maybe wanting to sort of push things to it. Always very adventurous. So I was always very stereotypical, sort of one of the lads wanting to push it to sort of the limit. So for me, out of all the sports, combat sports seemed to be the ones that were most competitive. I always used to say to my mates that, you know, if you're on a desert island fighting for the last coconut, you wouldn't play a game of football. You know, you'd have a fight. I really loved it, and I was all right, but you know, I was never going to be a world champion. It was just something I really enjoyed.
Yeah.
And what was quite interesting was I always knew I enjoyed the coaching more than anything else. I think even when I was young, I didn't know I enjoyed it more. But looking back, if my coach were to ask me to demonstrate or run the warm-up or run the class, I'd be more excited about that than I was about competing or any other aspect of it. So from a young age, I always preferred the coaching. That mentality was also why I joined the infantry, because if you watch a movie about the army, it's generally about the soldiers. So there's loads of roles within the military, but I was like, well, I may as well join the infantry. I may as well go and be a soldier. But quite quickly, I realized that my main passion, although everyone wants to be a good soldier, my main passion was the PTI, the coaching of the soldiers. But I do think the reason I wanted to do the army was because it was almost like a sort of macho thing to do as a young lad. It sounds sort of bizarre to say, but you almost wanted to go and, join the army and get into fights and go to war and do that sort of stuff. It was very much like possibly a naive or young man sort of testosterone fueled sort of desire to want to go and, make something of yourself. And
it's true. Real boys, they like to fight. They like all from a very young age, and the toys that they buy and everything else. So why did you leave the army in 2015?
The last 2 years I spent, so I was working in Cyprus, where it was sort of the tail end of Afghanistan. So we're sort of going out there just so we're ready to deploy. So what the British Army does is they have sort of bases in Cyprus, which is obviously closer to the Middle East. And it was at that point that I realized I want to solely focus on being a physical training instructor. And it was also that point where I realized that I don't want to do a full career in the army. I've got no drive now to become like a regimental sergeant major. It was at this point that I realized I wanted to go and have my own sort of business. So I managed to get posted to Catterick, which is where they train the infantry recruits as a PTI. So I spent 2 years training the recruits. And it was during that time really that it was a very, very fortunate transition into sort of becoming essentially a civilian. So while I was there, I set up a boot camp company with another military guy. And that was obviously working with civilians. I just knew at that point, I'd had a brilliant time in the army. Brilliant. It was a great laugh. But I knew at that point that I would just be going through the same as what I've already done in the military. I'd just be climbing the ranks, right? I've done exercise, I've done different things. I was getting a little bit older, and I just realized I need to go and do my own thing now. And there was no sort of second thoughts about that. There was no, even after leaving the army, I miss being part of that camaraderie in the lads, but just like I miss being a younger bloke and not being married and going out with your mates more often. But as a whole, I don't miss it at all. Because I knew that the next step for me was hopefully getting the gym.
And you had no savings when you left the army, and you had such determination and motivation, and you ended up opening your own fitness training facility within 18 months. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's unbelievable. So how did you go from having no savings to opening your own facility? And what were your trials and struggles, and what drove you? What kept you going?
I think a massive part of it is what I call naive optimism. So I think, in all honesty, it was sort of ignorance, sort of a glass half full type of guy. So I was just naive about just how hard it could be. So I had in my head that, right, I'm an ex-army physical training instructor. I'm going to leave the army, come to an area of the UK it's a nice industrial town where I live, but it's an affluent area around the surrounding areas. And I just thought, I'm going to be a ex-military physical training instructor that's had a lot of background working with athletes, working with soldiers. I'm going to come to Macclesfield and everyone's going to want to train with me. I'm going to be charging $40, $50 an hour, and they're going to come running because of my background. And it wasn't the case. And I left the military with no savings. And when I mean no savings is I had to use a credit card to put the deposit down on the flat that I was renting. What my plan was to start sort of running PT sessions in the park, which, as you can imagine, in the UK is more risky as well because of weather. Right. So I had no facility, no spare cash in the bank, like literally nothing. I was in an overdraft, but I was like, well, I'll get clients to start. I naively thought a lot of my friends and family would train, but that didn't happen. So I started doing boot camps in the park. First boot camp I did, no one turned up. for the first week, no one turned up. So I had a big van with all this sort of boot camp and personal training on it. No one turned up. And then eventually one woman turned up, and that was my first ever client, but she was paying £5 for the boot camp. So I was starting to sort of panic. And then my van's gearbox went and I couldn't afford to fix it.
Oh no.
So I was like, scrap the van, got off about £250-300 for the van.
Wow.
And luckily, one of my best friend's cousin owned a boxing gym in the town. So I said to him, look, can I store my kit in your boxing gym? And if I get some clients, can I PT out of your boxing gym? And he said, yes.
Amazing.
I noticed there was a small room at the side of the boxing gym, and the mill owner. So where I live is called Macclesfield, and it's called a silk town because it's actually the official end of the Silk Road, from China.
Oh yeah.
It's the official end of that Silk Road. So it's an old industrial mill. You have lots of mills here. So the owner of the mill turned around to me and said, look, you can have it for 40 quid a week. However, you've got to clear it out because it was full of junk. And I said, yeah. I spoke to my dad about it, and he said, well, you can't even pay your rent. You've got no clients. Why are you taking on another place to rent? So I said to the mill owner, look, I can't afford it. He says, I'll give you 3 months rent free. So I was like, yeah, let's go. So I sort of went off the motto of, take the leap and grow your wings on the way down mentality, just dive in. So I managed to get the room kitted out with what I had from my van. And I said to the client that I had from the boot camp, look, I'm going to be running sessions in this room because I don't have a car, essentially. Do you want to come and do sort of indoor sessions rather than outdoor boot camps? And she said, well, doing one-to-one PT is not really viable for me financially because it's a difference from like paying a £5 for a boot camp to doing one-on-one. So I just said, look, you can have that slot at that price and try and get some of your friends or family to come along, and they can pay for a group session then. And then it's viable. And the weeks went on. I slowly started to build up my clients. It wasn't even after a couple of months, it was probably the best part of 3 months, her sisters started to come to the sessions, and I was starting to get a little bit busier. At this point as well, I'd also sort of gone through a divorce from my first wife that I'd sort of met while I was in the army. And obviously she was living in the flat that we'd got together. So at this point I had nowhere to live.
Wow.
So obviously I had lots of friends and family, but it was a little bit of ego really that I sort of was sleeping in my car, some of the time during that phase. But what happened is I started to slowly get busy. And I think what it was just my style of training. Obviously that sort of level of expertise started to get well known around the town. And then before long, I was doing about 40 to 50 hours of PT a week.
Wow.
Now, and that was a little bit too much in all honesty, but what happened was, my first client who said that she couldn't afford a session, she still had that sort of prime time slot. And she was like, look, you're getting busy now, you can cancel me. And I was like, no, like get your sisters along and you'll be fine. And they eventually come. And what eventually happened was the sister of that first client became my investor. So
amazing.
So they used to ask me all the time, like, what's 5S? Because what I did with the business was, rather than sort of run it as me being, so it's called 5S Fitness, rather than it being me as a PT, I sort of portrayed it as being a much bigger business than it was. So, if I wrote an article on the website, it was like, here's an article by 5S Coach J. So they actually thought it was a franchise. And I sort of made sure that the branding was strength, speed, stamina, suppleness, skill. The whole thing was about bringing strength and conditioning, bringing a much higher level of training to the layman, basically, to average people. So what happened was, she was asking, what's your aim with the company? And I said, I want a big gym, have a membership. This is what I want to charge. She was asking me, how I was going to go about it. And, I was very, very honest. I was just like, look, I've got no money other than what I'm pulling in, and I'm just going to have to build up. And then after sort of a couple of months of sort of negotiation, she invested sort of £50,000 to open the big gym. And that's when I opened the gym that I've got now. That's now been running for the best part of 7 years, the big gym. And we've got, a couple hundred members and got all the PTs. I've got about 5 or 6 coaches working out of the gym. And in terms of client base, it's all the way from like quite high level athletes all the way down to just normal people, or people that have got quite severe injuries and ailments and stuff like that we work with. So it's the whole spectrum. But it's a public gym that's open 6 days a week. And that's sort of my hub now, and that's sort of my passion. And then from there, obviously, I went into the writing and the academy.
So first of all, I mean, I think it's amazing. One of my favorite quotes is that failure is the mother of all success, and failure teaches you how to be creative, and you learn from it, and you have to appreciate it so that you can get better and better and become, who you're meant to be. But it's so inspiring to me to hear nobody came up to your first session, nobody came up to your second session, but you just kept plugging away and doing it. And then you got creative and you figured it out. It's hard when you have this idea, because I would have thought that your idea of somebody coming from the Army as a trainer would be a big deal and everybody would want to train with them. But you found out that wasn't the case right away. And that must have been a big letdown. But the fact that you're a half glass full type of person is probably what propelled you to just keep going. And I love that. So tell me about your first book, and how did you get the inspiration to write it? Number one. And number two, how did you get published? Did you have to pitch it to a couple of publishers, or did somebody approach you?
Being a coach, sort of, I always realized that, like I was saying, young, I realized I was a coach. And then as I got into coaching, I realized that I really like coaching coaches and going to a much higher level of detail on stuff. Mm-hmm. And I also realized that me joining the military from school, I'm not an academic, mm-hmm. but I like the idea of writing complex stuff and sort of simplifying it. That was sort of what I consider to be my niche, and I do now. That's ultimately what coaching is making something easy to understand. I've got quite an affinity for books, which you can tell. I sort of collect books and manuals. So I've always had an affinity for books. So I've always wanted to write books. Although I've read a lot of the sort of very advanced strength and conditioning manuals from like people like Zatsiorsky and Verka, all these Russian sports scientists, and obviously American and English ones and stuff like that, and all over Europe, they're often very complex. Yeah. And they're aimed at people that are often academics or at the mm-hmm. highest levels of sports science. And that's fundamentally not me. I can read and understand these, and I've worked with elite level sport, but fundamentally where I get the most value is from just across the board, working with everyone. So that was what I wanted to write, and I knew that from the start. And the way I actually got into writing was I was writing the first book that I came up with, which hasn't actually been published in a sense as in this title, was Train the Movements. So the whole idea of the book was, rather than, most people you come across train muscles. And I was like, you've got to remember that it was like sort of best part of almost 7 or 8 years ago. I was sort of going, well, let's train movements. So push, pull, basically hinge, squat, lunge, push, pull, rotate, gait, train the movement patterns. And it was just a strength training manual, essentially. And the idea was it was going to be a big, big book. Now, where I sort of struck it lucky, really, is one of my clients ended up being he's one of the most successful indie publishers on Amazon for guitar. So he publishes guitar books. He's got dozens and dozens of guitarists that he publishes.
Wow.
Their work. So he said to me, what you're trying to do? And I said, I want to write a strength conditioning manual, a tome. It wants to be sort of like, in my head, it was like, this is my magnus opus for me. And he said, the problem is you're trying to write a symphony, and what you really want to start with is a song. And he's like, what's the first chapter? And I was like, well, it just talks about like the posture, position, stuff like that. He's like, well, write me that book. He says, your first chapter, that's your first book. And it was very simple. And then we went through talks, and eventually he published my first few books, very, very simple books, and they did well. And I got hundreds of emails sort of thanking me for helping with, it seemed to go down the lines of injury prevention and making people feel good.
And they were bestsellers, your books.
Yeah. So the first one was a bestseller. Yeah.
That's amazing.
The amount of advice that I was given from him was exceptional, but it was very much about sort of stripping the books down to the basics. Mm-hmm. And at this point, I was sort of thinking about creating a whole academy. So I become a centre in the UK where we actually qualify personal trainers. So if you want to be a personal trainer or a strength and conditioning coach, I can qualify you.
Okay.
So I got sort of certified to do that from the governing body in the UK, and these are internationally recognised. So if someone in the States wants to do my personal training qualification, I can qualify them as a personal trainer. It'd be recognised in the United States, it'd be recognised all over the world.
Oh, wow.
But what I wanted to do was what Active IQ have and Simspa is a baseline curriculum. So I wanted to massively expand on this, because at this point I was writing a lot of content. I'd written books that weren't published, but it was a masses of content. I decided I was going to set up an academy that sort of, alongside my sort of personal training, strength and conditioning qualifications, it's online courses and books, and it's upskilling fitness professionals and enthusiasts. So it's targeting not the highest level of sports scientists, but the sort of really motivated fitness professionals and really motivated fitness enthusiasts, people that just want to learn about training. And it's at that point that I started to look into, because I wanted full control and I wanted to be able to, what I found is whenever I put my books into editing, they just got edited right down, which was great, because I'm not the best writer in the world, and that's not me being modest. It's, I'm not going to be known for my writing ability, but I'm fundamentally teaching people how to exercise and stuff. So it doesn't have to be literally genius, it's just straight to the point. But I wanted to be able to write exactly how I write, which, I've had editors before and academics read it and go, look, you caveat a lot. You've got to tell the reader what they want. And I'm like, well, I want to tell the reader that there's not one way to squat. There is 10 ways, and they're all right. But here's my understanding. So it was a lot of waffling sometimes in my books where I'm talking about everything. But I sort of said to the editors, I want them to know all this. I want them to know that, I think that sort of caveats, and stuff like that, and explaining stuff, that's not what you do on social media, because it doesn't get the clicks. They want the clickbait. They want things to be like them shocking titles. But I want to be sort of more sort of a fence sitter, where I'm saying, yes, this is right and this is right.
Right.
This is what I think, but actually I see the argument for both. So my books were sort of being heavily edited. So I decided that I was going to learn to sort of self-publish. And since then I've sort of self-published another sort of best part of 20 books now.
Wow.
And just note that some of them are quite sort of basic manuals, or some of them are sort of training programs that have been expanded into sort of books.
I saw that on your website and on your social media, and also on Amazon. Yeah.
So what I started was some are big tomes. So the strength training, that's a good 300-400 pages and over 80 to 100,000 words.
Wow.
But I set up a project called Paperback Programs, which is I'm trying to write a sort of 12-week strength and conditioning program for over 100 sports. So it explains the sport, and then it shows you an example of a 12-week program for that sport.
Oh, that's interesting.
So that was sort of one of the projects, and other projects are just, anatomy and physiology books, but making it more simple. So it's trying to hit all the areas of physical training, and make them easy to understand.
Which is important, because I've gone to read things too, and I'm not a scientist by any means. I got out of chemistry in high school. And some of this stuff, it's like you said, it's really geared towards people who are food and exercise scientists. And a lot of it just gets confusing, or I'm just too tired by the time I start to read that I can't get through it. So it's nice to have things that are simple. And that's probably part of the reason that they've done so well, is because anybody can read them. And now that you've built this like international fitness business empire, what types of clients do you still train? Are you mainly training coaches, or do you still personally train clients?
Originally, I was doing 85 hours a week in the gym for the first 2 to 3 years. And now then it dropped down in recent years to 60 hours in the gym, as in coaching and running classes. And now I've got it, my sort of long-term aim was to get it down to 40 hours, which is, essentially a normal working week. And then I do sort of the SCC, the strength and conditioning course stuff on top of that, and the writing. And I always sort of, my long-term goal was to get to 40 hours in the gym and then about 20 hours on the other company. Because I just think when it's your own company, it might sound like a lot, like 60 hours, but actually when it's your own stuff, it's not the same as working 60 hours a week for someone else.
No, of course.
Yeah, and writing's enjoyable. So
yeah,
in the gym, have got decent level athletes, and we've also got, like I said, injured people that are sort of rehabbing. But the biggest percentage of people is sort of middle-aged, because the gym's quite intense. So it's like mainly free weights, and the conditioning, we call it, which is the sort of circuit training, high intensity training. It's hard training. So we find that the young folk don't tend to go for it. They're sort of doing the muscle work. You know, when you're young, you sort of join the gym. It's more social. It's more, let's get the physique. Obviously, body composition is a byproduct of training hard and eating well. But I find that once people hit the 30s into the 40s and the 50s, they're far more health conscious rather than just sort of body conscious, like as in physique. They want a good physique as well, but they're more conscious about being healthy, being able to be with the kids, live a sort of not necessarily a longer life, but a life that's physically capable. So the majority of my clients are, you know, in that bracket where it's sort of 50-50 male, female, middle-aged. A lot of them are hobbyist athletes, so they're doing stuff like Tough Mudders, you know, the OCR. High Rocks is a big one now that a lot of them are into. But it's just general clients. A lot of them are really good cyclists or really good runners. You know, some of them, one's just done a big 100 miler at the weekend. So a lot of them are decent level sort of amateur athletes. But the majority are just what you'd consider normal folk. So I run, when I'm in the gym for the full day, so it's a 15-hour day, I do 6 classes during that day, and I normally do about 5 to 7 PTs a day.
Okay, that's a long day.
Yeah, but it's, and like I said, I think because I quite like talking to people, so I'm talking to people all day. It's in my sort of ecosystem. So everything's sort of, it's almost like on your terms. Everyone's coming in, everyone's being nice. I've got coffee, I've got food. Yeah, I'm not having to labor or anything. Nothing's too taxing. And what has been absolutely key for me within business, which is what I always wanted to do, was have the long day in the gym and then a long day at home, which originally was obviously writing and working on the courses. But I've got 3 kids, you know, a wife and 3 kids I look after my kids on the Tuesday, Thursday, but I work all day Monday, at home with the kids on the Tuesday, work all day Wednesday, at home with the kids Thursday. Eventually, when they go to school, them days are going to be my writing days and working on the courses. So what I find is that contrast is key for me. And I think it's the same when it comes to my clientele. So if I was just working with elite level sport, I think I'd get quite bored. If I was just working with injured people or just working with average Joes, to think of a better term, like, because most of them are far more capable than you sort of perceive. Yeah. I remember just a sort of off point really, but in the military, they always sort of instilled in you that civvies were lazy, civvies were useless. And then I realized when I got out of the army that actually all these civvies that joined my type of gym are actually all really, really motivated. So half the lads that I was training in the military, they were forced to do the fitness. These guys are paying for it.
Right. They're paying for it. And there's something to be said about motivation. I mean, there have been classes or training sessions that I've been afraid to go to, but that I thought maybe I was a beginner and I could handle, but it's all mindset.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We are definitely seen as, in some ways, from an outside view, you'd be quite intimidated by the gym. People would, and people say that, and we're known as a very, very tough gym in terms of intensity. Like our conditioning sessions can be absolutely grueling, but fundamentally it's as hard as you work. If I said to you, you're going to do 10 press ups, 10 sit ups, 10 jump squats, that repeated.
I love that personally, but most people don't.
No, but that could be the worst workout you've ever done, depending on how hard you push yourself. Yeah. So when people say to me, is the beginner classes? I say, no, because if you're on the battle ropes, you can go 50%. He or she might go 100%. Yeah. If you can't do a burpee with chest to the floor, just do a burpee without putting your chest to the floor. If you can't do 10 kilo weights, do 2 kilo weights. Right. So for me, it's all adaptable. So everything's tailor-made because you've got a coach that's just on everyone. Right. So there's no beginner classes. There's no sort of segmentation of people at all. Everyone's in. Yeah. And when they come to the strength classes, we don't go, right, everyone's squatting. You're like, right, what are you working today? If they don't know, we say, right, you're doing this day. And you're coaching all people to their ability. If someone can't back squat, we get them on something else. So everything's tailor-made. But from an outside view, you would think we were quite sort of hardcore gym. Yeah. But on an internal view, you'd be like, this is like from what we've heard is that you'd be like, this is the most friendly gym I've ever been to. And everyone's really down to earth. Most people are sort of middle-aged, if not older. And they're all just very friendly.
Yeah. And it's funny that you talk about the difference in age and what motivates people. I've always been the type of person that wants to get a good workout in, to the point where when I was younger, I would be at the gym and somebody would come up and try to talk to me. And I would literally pretend I spoke a different language because I didn't want to be bothered. I wanted to work out. And I remember I was in West Hollywood at one of the gyms during the Grammys one year. And I was there and I was trying to get on a machine, and it was all influencers taking selfies, and I couldn't get on a machine. They weren't working out. They were just taking selfies. And I was like, I'm going to have to book a class if I want to work out but it's true. I find as well, just being in somebody who takes high intensity interval classes and personally trains with people with a personal trainer, it is more of a little bit older generation that is more serious and focused. And it's true, like they're not as body conscious. They're just I'm still body conscious, but that probably stems from being in the entertainment industry my whole life. But a lot of people are just really health conscious and they want to be strong.
Yeah, that's the key is that's what we preach sort of at my gym, which is very much like body composition is a byproduct of it. And that's what most people want. And if you were to ask people, you click your fingers, they're going to want the shape that they want to get.
Yeah.
But so much of it is genetics. And that's real. It's a lot of genetics. A lot of people's diet, that's the cornerstone of body composition is diet. And a lot of people aren't going to massively change some of their sort of drinking or their diet habits. They want to be as healthy as they can be. Now, a lot of them, we know from the science that exercise isn't burning as many calories as people would like to think it does. And when they look at how many calories it is burning, they look at the calories in a chocolate bar and they go, ooh. So basically, we really push in terms of to drive long-term consistency. It's you've got to be multiple goals. So you can have your primary goal as you want to look good, but fundamentally, you want to have them, even if they are secondary goals or just goals that align, where you want to feel good, both mentally and physically.
Yeah.
Also educating people that not only does lifting weights, for example, increase muscle density, which you're going to atrophy as you age. So I always say to people, it sounds a bit morbid, but if you're maintaining where you are right now as you age, you're improving because you're getting worse. So it's like if you stay in the same place, you're improving because as you get older, everything's going downhill.
I know.
And that's it. So it's
hard.
And all the evidence shows that not only are you building muscle, which is absolutely key, but you're also building bone density, which is proved with, NASA knew that they had to do strength training or they're going to lose bone density in space.
Yeah.
We're under the compression of 1G. So that's why we have the bone density we do. And what happens is over time, we lose that bone density. And you're getting women, for example, during the menopause can lose up to 20% of bone.
And osteoporosis is a huge deal. I mean, I constantly was telling my mom, you need to, start building muscle instead of just doing cardio so that you can protect your bones and you don't get hunched over and you don't get osteoporosis. And she did a health and strength assessment somewhere. I think it was at a doctor's office, and she felt so weak that she was like, oh my gosh. And that actually pushed her to go get a personal trainer and start working out and building muscle. And it's amazing how fast at 69 years old, she was able to feel stronger.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Because a lot of it's novice gains. If you've never done something, you're going to improve massively in the first few weeks, in the first few months. But yeah, it's what people don't realize is that fundamentally, that if you were to read the statistics on like risk of falling and when you do fall and when you've got low bone density, and like you read the studies on, hand grip strength is a massive indicator of like early death. The ability to stand, the ability to stand on one leg. The comorbidity to most sort of issues is atrophy. You start to lose your muscle mass. You lose the muscle mass. You lose your bone density. What you've seen in a lot of studies is when an elderly person falls, that's the huge catalyst then to the sort of the downward slope.
Yeah.
Because if an elderly person who's very, very active, which is not just key for the physical state, but also the mental state, with things like Alzheimer's or the cognitive decline that we'll all experience.
Yeah.
They fall over and they hit the hip, they break the hip, for example.
Yeah.
And then chair bound, bed bound for weeks on end.
Or they aspirate.
Yeah. And then
which is a big thing with hip breaks. Yeah.
And then they just decline like dramatically. What you've seen as well when they've done radiographs on people that have trained, because a lot of the time, the population now, most people are the resistance trained, they're training, but they weren't necessarily doing as much back in the 50s, but there were some. And they've looked at people from the 60s and stuff that have trained consistently through an athlete, and they do radiographs of the width, the bone density, and these guys have took decades. They're 20 years younger in terms of like what you'd call skeletal age.
Yeah.
So this is absolutely vital. So exercise doesn't make you live longer. Someone that exercises is not going to live 20 years longer than someone that doesn't. A lot of it's very genetic. I always say you get dealt a hand, you play it the best way you can.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, what exercise is going to do is improve the quality of the years that you have. Mm-hmm. And what we can see clearly is what my prediction is when you walk in a gym now, most people are quite impressed when they see 60-year-olds is quite common in a gym. In my gym, we've got loads of 60-year-olds. 70-year-olds less common. 80-year-olds very uncommon. And 90-year-olds very, very uncommon. And I think as the decades go on, the next decade, 70-year-olds are going to be common. They're going to be running ultramarathons. They're going to be doing tough mudders, and then it's going to be 80-year-olds. And although we've only got so many years in a human body before it gets a little bit science fiction-y, they reckon someone alive today is going to live to 150. Well, that's what they estimate. But the body's only got so much in it before we go into any sort of extreme form of medical intervention. But what we do know is if you're exercising, the quality of them years is just going to be profoundly better. And that's what we push, because at the end of the day, if you see every session as a session in the bag of it's just going towards you feeling better mentally and physically. And we've just talked about the sort of physical side, not even the mental side, which for most people I would argue is even bigger these days. I always say to people, never judge how you feel till you've got your heart rate up. Even if you've had an argument with someone, even if you feel like tired. So people come to the gym, they go, "Oh, I feel knackered." I'm like, well, warm yourself up and see how you feel. Get your heart rate to 80% at max. See how you feel then.
Yeah.
You feel better.
Endorphins.
People think a warm-up's like slow and steady. I say warm up, go up to 90%. Yourself on a bike or a rower, push yourself hard, get that heart rate going, get a slight sweat on, and judge how you feel then. And a lot of the problems of the day and how you felt going into the day changes when you've had your heart rate spike. And I'm a big advocate of that, is like get your heart rate up every day, or at least on the training days or the days when you feel thingy, get your heart rate right up. It's a massive game changer.
I know it makes my entire day when I've had a great workout, an intense workout in the morning. I have more energy for the rest of the day. I sleep better at night. I feel better. It's so mental. And I could be having the worst day where everything is hitting the fan. But if I've had that boost, it's totally different.
Yeah. And that needs to be conditioned into young people, because you don't want to develop, like you can develop a bad relationship with food. You don't want to develop a bad relation with exercise. And that's something they sometimes do wrong in school, where they're punishing kids to do cross country. It's amazing how many people hate running in school, but now they love running as adults.
Yeah.
So I think we need to take an approach which is very much like the right exercise for individuals. And also a big thing that we push is strength training in the young people, because all young people can strength train. It's a complete misconception that they can't. So you can resistance train from any age. And we found with a lot of young girls and a lot of young boys, especially some of the young girls we've had, which aren't into sport, they're not competitive, they don't like playing hockey, they're not into sort of what we call PE in school, physical education. But as soon as they've got in the gym and they're just working on squats and deadlifts and bench press, and maybe at that age of their life, it's not too physically exerting on the cardiovascular system, which they find stressful, they actually develop a really, really good relationship with physical training. And off the back of that, they feel more resilient to then go into doing runs and stuff like that. But when they're just thrown into that, right, physical training is almost like a punishment. And that's key, making sure that people don't see exercise as just calorie burning. Like, I've got to just calorie burn so I can do this, because then exercise becomes this chore you have to do. So the focus should be exercise is this thing that's going to make you feel really good.
Yeah.
You know, and off the back of that, you're going to have all these body compositions. You are going to be burning more calories, which is going to give you that little bit more if that is the primary focus.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to pivot just a little bit. How did your experience in the Army shape who you are now? Do you think it made you more disciplined, or do you think you were disciplined enough before that?
I think I was a fairly disciplined youth, really.
Yeah.
You know, I got into trouble, and I think boxing definitely helps that. The discipline, especially Thai boxing, like martial arts.
Yeah.
There's definitely sort of a sort of discipline to them sort of sports that goes beyond other sports that I've seen. So I would say I was very disciplined on an intrinsic level, but the military matures you. Both matures you and it has its detriment. So on one side, you can become quite institutionalized. You know, you have what we call the scoff house or a cookhouse. You go and have your meals every day. You're not having to cook. You're not having to pay rent. You're not paying bills.
Yeah.
You're literally living in a camp with a load of other lads, because when I was in the infantry, it was only men. Women weren't allowed to join, but they are now. So there's that negative side where actually you become quite institutionalized. But on the flip side, you get exposed to a level of work that is, and I would actually say that being, other than when people are on tour and doing very hard, extreme form, they're in conflicts and stuff.
Yeah.
Day-to-day life in the military is quite easy, in my opinion. If you're fit and you do fitness every morning, but as a whole, it's a good laugh. But it definitely matures you to a level. One thing I find odd is if I walk into a pub, it's not uncommon for another squaddy that doesn't know me to go, "Oh, you're a squaddy." You know, a lot of police officers say this as well, that people recognize you. So it definitely, even, and I don't think it's from just like people doing multiple tours of, say, Afghan or Iraq. I think it's just being in the military and having that regimented routine.
Yeah.
And also a big part of it is, especially my experience in the infantry, because your job was a soldier, first and foremost, your job as a soldier, everything had to be perfect.
Yeah.
And it was always, where's your ammunition? How's your kit packed? Everything was like, how are your boots? And if you weren't doing something right, you were seen as useless. You were seen as bad as your job. And being seen as bad as your job as a soldier is more of an insult than if you do whatever job it is. It doesn't matter. I'm not saying a job isn't important, but if someone turns around to someone who's working in retail or whatever and says, "You're not very good at this," people will be like, but it's not to the level of, if I was to say, someone said to me, "You're not a good soldier," what that's saying is you're risking people's lives. I wouldn't want to be in a combat situation with you because you are useless and you would risk my life and you could risk other people's lives. You're not a good soldier. So it's actually quite an insult to be seen as essentially shit or not very good.
Yeah, of course.
So that definitely instills a level of almost like sort of a high standard. You know, and I remember when I first left the military, and this was being a PTI as well. Obviously in the military, you're a little bit harder as a PTI.
Yeah.
I had people that would join in the military, young lads, and they'd tell me what time they'd got on the run, which is the fitness test for the army. And they'd got not great times, some of them. And at first I was about to sort of give them a little bit of a shouting. So I was like, no, that's terrible. That's useless. No, get a grip of yourself. But actually I had to sort of wind that back, and now I'm a civvy now and say, oh yeah, that's all right. All you need to do it. So it was a far nicer
Interesting.
approach.
Yeah.
But, you know, in the military, I was a lot harder. I was always fair. I always say you don't necessarily have to be nice. You have to be fair.
Right.
But I was definitely a lot harder, and that sort of rigidity in the military definitely made me a harder, much more rigid. Things are done right. Some people, everyone's got traits of OCD. They've not got the actual disorder. But if you walk into my gym and ask any of the members, they are like, he's quite pedantic with dumbbells and plates and where they go. And I tell people it's always in jest. But if someone doesn't put something back right, and they'll go, oh, OCD. And I'll say, no, that's the way it goes. That's not OCD. That's how it's done.
Right.
You know,
so is your bed made right now? And are there hospital corners? Is it like, is it made like it's a wrapped present? Because I know that my father made us do that after he had.
My house is very tidy, but in all honesty, like, although I'm very tidy and everything in my office is where it is, like, my wife is another level of tidy to me. Like, if you open a cupboard, every can's facing forwards, and
I love that.
Yeah, she watches videos on cleaning.
I love that.
Yeah. I read books about dwarves and elves and Tolkien and stuff like that, so I can't say anything. She watches content on literally people cleaning the houses and organizing the shelves and stuff like that.
I love that.
I said something once. I was like, "What? Why are you watching this?" But they have millions of subscribers, so I can't talk.
Well, they say cleanliness is next to godliness.
Well, exactly, yeah. So I could take credit for it. I'm very well organized and clean, but I'd say my wife's to a much higher level than me. Something she genuinely enjoys.
Oh, well, that's good. That's nice. So, what advice would you give a young entrepreneur?
Be prepared to sort of put the hours in initially. I think it's not just about hard work. Hard work doesn't always pay off.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that a lot of people preach, like, oh, if you work hard, you'll make it. Not necessarily. But I think any young entrepreneur needs to understand that you're going to have to go in. And I would say that there's a level of which I think I took risks that looking back, I'm like, oh I couldn't have done that now. But I do think that go in with that naive level of optimism where you go in hard, because sometimes you have got to fake it till you make it a little bit. Yeah. You're not bullshitting people essentially, but you've got to push. If to get to here, you can't operate here, you've got to operate here. Yeah. So I would say you've got to go in like you've already made it and be willing to put the hours in. But if you look at the statistics, I mean, I've seen somewhere that the average age of an entrepreneur starting is actually 43. And usually they've had like 5 to 10 years of industry experience. Yeah. Everyone perceives it to be like young 20-year-old tech entrepreneurs. But most of the time it's much older people that have had industry experience. Go in thinking that you're going to do really, really well, because if you don't do well, it hasn't happened. But if you go in cautious and it doesn't happen, you're not better off, are you? So you may as well
it's true.
Go in like you're going to take over the world. As much as I could have achieved much more success than I have, and hopefully I keep going. But I wouldn't have achieved any of this if it wasn't for the fact that I was a little bit naive and completely optimistic.
And there are a lot of people out there who are very happy that you kept going.
Yeah.
What advice would you give people who are struggling to stay in shape despite working out and eating healthy?
The first things first, when someone is really struggling with, like, as in they're not losing weight or they're not gaining, is be very, very honest with the diet. Because most people are they misjudge. I think when they did a study where they had people estimate how many calories they're eating, they're out by about 1,200 or something ridiculous, all of them. And most people that I find that are very much focused on weight loss, for example, they have this perception of their diet being very good, and it's just not. And what I would suggest is, don't just look at it as a daily intake. Look at your weekly intake.
Yeah.
How does it add up over the course of the full week? And understand that a small calorie surplus over a longer duration can result in weight gain. Aside from the diet element, which is, be very honest with your diet, is fundamentally, when it comes to training, is go back into doing a little bit more education on sort of progressive overload. So with resistance training, if you're just doing the same thing day in, day out, 4 sets of 10 on a bench press, there needs to be progressive overload. So in my gym, we have all sort of biscuits, fractional plates. And we're always telling people that little bit more, but training isn't like that. It's going to go up and down. It's got to undulate. There's got to be periods where you do recover. That's why we undulate the sets and reps. So for a few weeks, you might be at sets of 1, sets of 2, sets of 3 reps. Other weeks, you're at sets of 10, sets of 12, sets of 15. So you're getting the volume in. So for me, what would be key for people is when it comes to resistance training, fundamentally understand that there's got to be progressive overload. So it's got to get harder and harder and harder, but that's got to undulate. There's not a golden rep or set range. You can build muscle at any rep range, whether it's 1 rep sets or 20 or 30 rep sets. What there has to be is sufficient load, sufficient intensity to stimulate adaptation, so to develop muscle. Now, when it comes to developing muscle, there needs to be sufficient protein and also calories as a whole. So if it's on the flip, we often talk about weight loss, but when it comes to gaining you need to have your body develop muscle. It's a huge, as your body's trying to survive. So the more muscle you have, the more energy expenditure it has. So you're getting a bigger engine. So actually it's not very efficient for a mammal to pack on a load of muscle. Now that's why we have hormones like myostatin that prevents us from doing that. So to convince your body to pack on muscle takes a lot of stimulus. So you have to strength train hard and work it, and you have to get high pro. So I always suggest get that high protein in, because it's telling your muscle you can afford it.
Right.
Make sure that you're getting in that surplus that's just enough to build the muscle. And be consistent. Consistency is the key, and that's what will build the muscle over time, is making sure the intensity is there. Always remember that muscle is far easier to retain than it is to gain. So never sacrifice. Keep the resistance training even when you don't feel like it, because even if your training sessions aren't very good, you'll be maintaining the muscle you've got. You're stimulating that muscle tissue that you've got. Keep the protein high, so you're not going to sort of atrophy the muscle that you've got. Never ever sacrifice muscle for fat loss, for weight loss. Where people go on these crash diets because you're losing this muscle that during your younger years you've gained, and you've had that advantage to develop this muscle. And essentially, you're not just sort of, with these yo-yo diets, you're not sort of just going like this. It's declining, because as you lose that muscle, your basal metabolic rate reduces, so you can't eat as many calories on a daily basis. So focus on good, consistent resistance training that's progressive overload. It gets progressively harder. Push yourself, get yourself down into lower rep ranges, so you start to develop more strength alongside doing sessions that have got more volume, so more reps. And then when it comes to high intensity training, don't be fooled by the fact that one study that was done was people were training in the morning and it was having a negative effect on their body composition, because what was happening, they were training hard in the morning, and then that was giving them a free pass to do nothing for the rest of the day. So what happens is, high intensity training is brilliant if it motivates you, but what it also does is, where you will burn most of your calories is neat, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So it's not the structured exercise, the daily movement throughout the day. So the key is, I would say, if you're struggling with weight, move more throughout the entire day. That's the key, because that's where most of the calorie burn is going to go, alongside just running your body. Don't see a hard exercise session which is going to make you hungrier, and it's going to make you feel like you can be lazy for the rest of the day, potentially. See that high intensity exercise has then got to be motivation to eat better, stay hydrated, make sure you're sleeping well. And that would be my advice as a whole, really.
Thank you. That's great advice. What's next for you?
Realistically, what's next is more things like this, because I've got a lot of content and I've got quite a few more books that I need to release. So I've got a publishing schedule that I'm working to, and there's 4 more big books that make up my Big 8 model, which is the different courses that I do. So that's an ongoing thing. My writing is a lifelong project. The gym that I have is I rent the property. So our next big aim for me would to be a buy-in industrial unit close to where I am. Which is difficult in a small town in the UK. There's less land, less property, right? So it's not an easy thing to do. But I've developed over the last sort of year or so running SCC. We've developed up to, I think we've got just over 120,000 followers on the Instagram.
That's pretty awesome.
So it's a good engagement. It's quite international. But what I've realized is, because of the anatomy work I've done and the books that I've done on sort of education, we've got quite a large following in India and Pakistan and areas like that. But what I need to do really is massively increase sort of my name as a brand and as an author, because the gym is sort of a local gym. It's a great gym, but it's not an international gym. I'm not looking to franchise it. That's my hub. That's my baby. I love it. It's a lifestyle business for me. Even if it wasn't making money, I would put cash flow from SCC to help keep the gym alive, because I love it. The next big aim really is to continue writing, but ultimately build my brand, which get asked to do workshops. I've been asked to do one in Rome, in Manchester.
Oh, cool.
One in India, which I had to turn down. So I am doing that sort of stuff. But the next big aim for me really is to I'm not looking to have my own podcast, but is to get onto more podcasts, raise my profile. Because although I've got quite a good audience, I've definitely not got a massive audience in the UK, the USA, which is a big deal for me really, is having that core audience in the UK, going down and speaking at more events, getting to the fitness expos in the UK and Europe and in the USA. So just building the brand as a whole.
That's great. I have one more question before we move on to my Fearless 5. What is the best advice you've ever been given?
So one was from my investor, which was sort of, I said it, which was don't be nice, be fair. And the reason for that is because sometimes I think I'm a little bit too soft, as in too nice, too forgiving. That's fine. And in business, I think as long as you're fair, you can sleep at night, So if you've got to make tough decisions, I think it's important to be fair, because otherwise, I think it's key for everyone to have them sort of morals and ethics. And, that's important to me. But it's also in the real world, people will take the mick. You'll have payments missing. You'll have people sort of, just not even taking advantage, just people
forget
and different things. And I've had a few business partners and stuff like that, and obviously had investors. And the key is to sort of look at not just look at what's fair to them, but also look at what's fair to you. Because sometimes it's always about giving that you want to be good to them. What can I give you? And it's like, well, think about it the other way. What's fair for you? Is it fair for you to do all this work? Or is it fair for you to give them that amount of money? So that's a key piece of advice, especially for me, where I'm not a ruthless businessman. Although I could be quite tough in the military. And I'd like to think that I could be tough as an individual per se, but I'm not ruthless as a businessman. My wife would say, she would be much harder than I am. And a second piece of advice, which has to be explained because it comes across the wrong way, was actually my publisher said it has to be good enough. And what that is a lot of people talk about being a perfectionist and doing things, but he says you'll never do it. You'll never get it out. If you continue, it's like, painting a picture, you'll never finish. So he says it has to be good enough. And that doesn't mean it's bare minimum, as in what's the minimal viable product. That's not what it means. It means you're like, I'm happy with this. This is good enough.
Right. Like it can be 80% or 90%. It doesn't have to be 100%.
Yeah. So you have to be proud of it. But I look at some of my old content and I go, I read paragraphs and I go, that's terrible. But you always progress. So that going off from that's key, is it has to be good enough and get it done, because you'll never get things done. My main thing I get when I mentor people, because I mentor a lot of coaches, and a lot of these coaches are obviously on the entrepreneurial side of things. They're wanting to open gyms, they're wanting to do stuff. The biggest problem I see is everyone's got these plans and they're never doing them because they say it's not the right time, it's not finished, it's not, and it's like, it's got to be good enough. Get it out there. You are going to improve, and you're going to look back at stuff and go, oh, that was terrible. Oh, that wasn't me. That wasn't right. But that's how you grow.
Yeah, so of course.
Get something that right now is good enough. Because I'm sure I'm going to publish a book that I'll look back on in 10 years and go, I'm going to unpublish that. I'm going to change that. That's what additions are. But that's the learning process. So get
absolutely
whatever you're doing to be good enough, get it out there.
Yeah.
And in the future, you can change it. You can change your opinions. You can adapt. But good enough is a very something I stand by.
Yeah, I love that advice, actually. So here is my fearless 5 questions. You get 2 passes and 5 questions. So you have to answer at least 3 of them. What is something that other people value that you don't necessarily value or subscribe to?
So I have a lot of friends, and I see every gym member as a friend, but I don't see having to have friends that need to be there for me all the time. I don't see that as being a huge thing for me. I'll see people say, if you're not willing to answer the phone at 3 a.m. or do this, then it's not a real friend. You need that high quality friends. And I watched a podcast recently that said that this is really key, to have people in your life but for me, I sort of see everyone that I interact with as a friend. So I see all my gym members as friends. Mm-hmm. And I don't although I do have them high quality friends that I rely on, that's not the thing that I put the value in. I put the value in just quality interactions with everyone.
Yeah.
More so than having that core group. So although I do, and I've got my wife and my kids that I adore, and I've got friends that I can rely on more than others, then them core friends that are like best friends is not what I put as much value in as other people do. I put more value in the guy that comes to my gym, and there's a few of the guys that we have a breakfast club on a Saturday. We just have bacon butties and a brew after we train. And
that's nice.
Although we're not the guys that are then brothers in arms and we can phone each other at any point, or that would be the person that I'd phone, I put almost more value in just quality interactions with a lot more folk rather than, the very core best friends.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, number 2. I think I know what you're going to say about this, but I'm interested to hear your answer. Everything in moderation or cheat days?
It's both, really, isn't it? I believe that you can't go wrong with everything in moderation. But I also think everyone has to be flexible where so I don't believe necessarily in consistent cheat days. But I do believe in fundamental. I believe in moderate. I think moderation, a well-balanced diet, train. But I also think that you have got to take things to an extreme sometimes, because that's humanity, isn't it?
Yeah.
So my training, I'll often go far beyond what I really should. And I think sometimes you've got to have them days where you do have a blowout, because it's just the way that we work. And they're some of the best experiences you'll have. Moderation is the key to health, doing everything in moderate amounts. But I think the key to sort of having a half decent life is to go extreme sometimes.
That's a good answer. Do you have any hidden talents?
I could do the splits, which isn't that common for men. I can do the splits. If I am out on a night out and drinking, that's one that shocks people. If a sort of grown man is able to just, especially I'm a good split. I'm a good 100 kilos as well. 6'1", sort of. If I can just go straight down into the splits, that's always a shocker for people. Yeah. They don't expect you, big ginger bloke, doing the splits.
Okay, so number 4, what's the last book you read?
I'm rereading The Lord of the Rings at the moment. I'm a bit of a Tolkien fanatic. I read The Silmarillion about 5 times, which is a notoriously sort of hard book. I tend to read. What I do is I always have about literally 5 or 6 books going at a time. So I'll have ones that I'm reading, but I'm a massive sort of Audible fan. So the beginning of Infinity by David Deutsch. The Ape That Understood the Universe is a sort of evolutionary biology book. Alchemy by Rory Sutherland, which is about marketing. There's a few books on stoicism like Marcus Aurelius that I've sort of delved into. Okay,
the last and final question from my Fearless 5. What's the last thing you Googled?
No, I Googled you prior to this podcast. The last thing I actually looked up, which is a sort of a bad habit, which is actually it comes back to entrepreneurship, is the thing that I do every time I switch on the computer, and it's actually procrastination. It feels like it's what we call like false productivity. It feels like I'm being productive, but I'm not. Is I look at my book sales, I look at my course sales, I look at each website, but I do it religiously. And sometimes it's almost like when you go from Facebook to Instagram to Twitter and then you go back to Facebook.
I've been there. Well, thank you so much. This was so interesting. I love your authenticity, and I'm really excited for the audience to hear where they can find you online and where they can get your books. So what's your website? What's your Instagram handle? We'll also have all of this in the show notes so people can go follow you. What book should they start with?
My personal website is jasoncurtis.org. My sort of company website, which is the Academy, is strengthandconditioningcourse.com. My Instagram is Strength and Conditioning Course, and it's the same on Facebook. And you can find all of my books on Amazon. If you search Jason Curtis, you'll find the books on Amazon. You can also buy sort of ebooks on my personal website, and that'll take you through to my academy and stuff like that. I would say it depends. If you are a fitness professional or coach that wants to really take your sort of expertise to the next level, it would be programming and periodization, which talks about how we develop training for an elite level of athlete and sort of the general plop. It also has the key to that book is the manual has loads and loads of examples and normative data and sort of stuff that I've collected over the best part of a couple of decades of coaching people. And then for the sort of more general sort of pop, there's a manual called Muscles, Mobility and Movement, and that looks at over 50 muscles in the body, and then it tells you how to basically tells you all about the muscle, how to release the muscle, stretch the muscle and work the muscle. So in terms of like a holistic book that looks at, got over 140 odd stretches, about 85 to 100 sort of strengthening exercises, that's a good one. But I would say for those that are interested in the gym, it would be the Strength Training Manual. That's a sort of a big tome that just looks at all things free weight training. So they would be the big three, really.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And I'm gonna dive into one of your books too. I appreciate you being on my show and all of your expertise and for sharing your journey with the audience. I hope to be in touch again.
Yeah, brilliant. I really appreciate that. And I hope I've not waffled on too much, because I have a tendency of doing that. But no. I've really enjoyed it. And that, I thought the questions were brilliant, really. It made me think,
good.
It was great to sort of talk about them sort of things.
Good. Well, I'm so glad. It was an absolute pleasure. I wish you even more success and happiness and everything that you deserve in life.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Have a wonderful evening.
You too. Speak soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Coach Curtis.
Thank you for watching and listening to Kelly Minds Her Manners. Make sure to subscribe to the show and don't forget to leave us a review to tell us what you liked about the episode. You can connect with Kelly at Kelly Minds Her Manners on Instagram and TikTok, or on our website, www.kellymindshermanners.com.